I'm Seigner. On June 2nd, it was my privilege to meet a young lady that very much talked about nowadays. That young lady is Angela Davis. Today, I'd like for you to meet Angela Davis.
Before we do, however, I'd like to say her views and positions on various issues and problems in our society are considered by many to be very controversial, while to others, they're considered to be totally radical.
People in this country often tend to do is that they cannot understand how people can be totally committed to bringing about a change in this country, totally committed to eradicating the oppression and exploitation to which we as black people have been subjected to for so many hundreds of years. And they think that the person must really be something more than that, something different. And that the struggle the person is involved in, political beliefs, political activities, and so forth, that must be some kind of a facade. But I can't separate myself as a human being, as a woman, from my commitment to overthrowing all of the conditions in this country, destroying those conditions which have it that black children continue to die from starvation.
Mm-hmm. When you speak of overthrowing those conditions, I think this is what frightens people so much, the average American, when you just simply say the word overthrow, he sees this as something very, very bad to him. I know you're not responsible for his feelings. So when you say these things, are you threatening someone or what?
We're threatening the oppressors with the power of the people. I see one of the things that people in this country forget about white people is that they founded this country on overthrowing their oppressor. They made a revolution. And they forget completely what that revolution meant. And they forget that we are carrying on a struggle which they began. You see, they forget that it was Abraham Lincoln who said that whenever the institutions in a country do not satisfy the people, don't respond to the needs and the desires of the people, then the people must exercise either their constitutional right to amend that government and those institutions, or their revolutionary right to overthrow it. They forget that they have themselves revolutionary ancestors. And we have to begin to show them more and more that we are going to carry on that tradition. We're going to push it up to a higher level where we can really then begin to talk about building a society in which all people can be free.
Mm-hmm. When I heard your speech, one of the things that you said that we must reevaluate our history. Were you speaking about the American history, the black history, or what?
I was talking about black history.
Black history.
Because one of the ways in which the oppressor in this country has tried to stifle our revolutionary potential is to convince us that in the past we have accepted our oppression, to try to convince us that we accepted slavery, that we accepted poverty, that we accepted starvation. And therefore, practically all indications that there was constant rebellion, constant resistance, constant refusal, that has been wiped out of our history. And so I think we have to look back towards our revolutionary ancestors. We have to learn from Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and Harriet Tubman and all of the other black people whom we don't know about now because there were no records kept. We have to begin to talk about looking to them for leadership so that we can carry our struggle to another level and finally destroy this monster who's oppressing us.
You mentioned genocide and birth control. And the mismanagement, more or less, of our children being fostered off onto other people. What are we talking about here in terms of blackness?
I see, there are a whole lot of people talking about ecology, talking about population control, talking about air pollution, and they are trying to divert the people from the real root of all those problems. I agree there is a problem of overpopulation, but why? Because the wealth of the world has been stolen and placed into the hands of a minority of the people, and therefore the majority of the people are the ones who have to bear the brunt of oppression. And so we don't talk about dealing with the problem of, quote, overpopulation by trying to convince people that they should take birth control pills or have themselves sterilized. We say that we have to snatch back what was stolen from us. And then that is the way in which we're going to solve the problem of overpopulation. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I heard when I was in Cuba last summer, when they were asked about their attitude towards birth control, they said that we don't deal with the problem of imperialism in that way. We deal with it by attacking the real enemy, by attacking the real problem. And that's what we have to do.
I wonder if I might ask you about some of your experiences in Cuba. We hear a lot of rhetoric about Cuba and the lack of surviving people in Cuba. Are the people there surviving?
They are not only surviving, but they are building a new man, a new society, a new way of being a human being. In terms of the material survival, there's nobody starving in Cuba now. There were thousands and thousands of peasants before the revolution who ate only when American firms like United Fruit happened to think that they needed some laborers to cut cane. And when they no longer felt that was necessary, the people had no means of subsistence. Now no one starves. Now no one is out of a job. So just on that very basic level of having enough to eat, that problem has been overcome. And then we could go on and talk about all kinds of other things which have happened as a result of the revolution. But
let's talk about some more. Can you talk about some more? I'd like to hear some more about this.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people throw back into your face when you talk about Cuba, they say, well, how come all of those Cubans are coming over to this country every day? And it's true. There's a plane that goes from Cuba to Miami every day, and there are a lot of people who are waiting to come here. But we have to ask ourselves, why are those people coming over here? Why aren't those people satisfied with the revolution? And it's very obvious, because those are the people who had a little bit before the revolution, a little bit, maybe a little bit more than that. But when, after the revolution, the people said to those people who had a house, a mansion maybe, that maybe there was a little bit too many rooms in there, that they ought to share that with the people, or they ought to move out into a smaller place, and that big place would be taken over as a dormitory for students or as a child care center. They weren't ready to deal with that, because they were concentrating on their own egoistic desires, which had been created and sustained, perpetuated by capitalism. They refused to let go of that mentality. They refused to understand the necessity of collective struggle, of sharing with the people, and therefore they leave. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who are coming over here today.
You've probably been asked this many, many times before. I'd like to ask you myself, I've never had the opportunity to ask you this. Are you against capitalism? I know it sounds like a very naive question.
Mortal enemy. That's the funniest question I ever heard.
Coming back to this country, you made a statement that how can black people be moderate in a violent society or violent situation? Now, every black revolutionist or civil rights workers asked to be moderate, take a little more time, things like this. How can this be justified with things which may be going against it? Or can it be justified?
I don't think one can. I think, like I said during my speech, you can't ask a mother whose baby is in the fire to snatch that baby out moderately, to snatch that baby out gradually. If I see a friend or a comrade being attacked by the pigs, with machine guns or with dynamite, you can't ask me to go up and be moderate and simply ask the pig to please hold off for a minute until I decide how I'm going to deal with that. And this whole question of nonviolence is something that has really confused the minds of the people in this country. Whenever I contemplate the whole question of nonviolence, I inevitably come up with the conclusion that anybody who accepts nonviolence as a philosophy, as a doctrine, is saying that he embraces the philosophy of suicide. Because when in South Africa, all of the thousands and thousands of African men, women, and children went out and prayed against apartheid, and the government, the racist, fascist regime, sent the army out, and thousands of men, women, and children were gunned down, machine gunned in the streets. That should teach us something, and we should learn that nonviolence can only be effective as a tactic when the enemy himself is also nonviolent, when he will listen to moral principles, when he will listen, in a nonviolent manner. But when he meets our nonviolence with tanks and napalm and machine guns, then if we are serious about fighting for the cause that we're talking about, if we're serious about struggling for freedom, it would be immoral of us not to return his blows and to do everything we can to destroy him so that we can talk about winning our struggle for freedom.
You mentioned genocide and birth control. The ratification of a certain treaty, remember?
Yeah, in 1948, the UN appointed a convention on the prevention and punishment of genocide. That convention drew up a treaty which was ratified by the General Assembly then, and which was signed by practically all of the member nations. That treaty is still in existence now. The United States government has not, to this day, signed that treaty. And just that very fact alone ought to teach us that this government has been and continues to follow a policy of genocide. And that genocide is not simply carting people into ovens. That genocide is the brother in the streets of the ghetto is harassed, intimidated, brutalized, murdered for no reason at all. That genocide is the fact that children do not get enough to eat. Children have to go to school without a good breakfast in the morning. Their minds can't function. That genocide is also of a psychological nature. The attempt that has been made, the unsuccessful attempt, I might say, to brainwash black people in this country over the last few centuries. Genocide in Africa. We remember the Congo, and we know what's going on right now. Genocide in Trinidad. Genocide all over the world. So I don't think how anybody in his right mind who's thinking today can deny the fact that the United States government is following a policy of genocide in order to sustain the inhuman, murderous, cowardly interests of a minority of the people in this country.
Now, do you feel that black people are the main targets of genocide? Or are there others?
In this country today, black people do constitute the main target. The kind of repression that's coming down on black people is more intensive, more calculated than on any other group of people in the society. And we have to ask ourselves why. Because a lot of people say that it's simply because we're black. Somehow or another, they don't like the color of our skin. But see, that's not true.
I was about to ask you that. Why?
Because there are a lot of people, a lot of black people in this who don't see themselves as they happen to be targets of that repression. The reason why is that black people have responded to the attempts to super exploit them, to use them as a reserve labor force in an capitalist economic system, which means that black people are kept unemployed, black people are forced to walk the streets, and black people are forced to expropriate, take what they want. I don't say steal, I say take, liberate what they want in order to survive. The fact that we have not bowed our heads before that fact, the fact that we have continually resisted, continually stood up, continually fought, and they have to resort to those genocidal methods in order to stifle that revolutionary potential, just as they're doing the same thing in Vietnam, because the Vietnamese have not resigned in their struggle in front of all the atomic weapons, the nuclear weapons, the tanks, the napalm, the biological warfare, the chemical warfare, in front of all that whole monstrous apparatus. They have not resigned themselves. They have kept on struggling. Therefore, more and more repression comes down.
There are many blacks as well as whites who would take offense to what you just said. They would say that black people have never lived better in this country. In fact, they would compare black people with somebody overseas and say, see, you're living much better than them. And how do you deal with this kind of thing?
Well, Huey Newton said something that I think is very appropriate and very relevant. He said, when you're in prison, you're in maximum security. When you're let out, or when you're out here, you just put on the minimum security. You're in prison just the same. And I don't think it makes any difference whether the prison is a little bit more lax in the methods that it uses. The fact that I have maybe 2 crumbs of bread instead of 1 crumb of bread, that still doesn't mean that I'm free. And we have to keep on, struggling until we get complete and total freedom, until we break down the bars of the prison completely.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of prisons, there is something in which you're involved at the present time. I don't know how many people are aware of the Soledad Brothers or not, but one of the young men happens to hail from this city here, which is Pasadena. And our present penal systems, I know what you think about them. I know what I think about them, too. But what part do they play in a possible genocide of black people?
Well, they play a very brutal, murderous role for hundreds and hundreds of years. But what's happening now is that it's becoming more and more obvious that the prisons and all the penal institutions are being used as instruments to perpetuate fascist repression. And I would say that the majority, if not all, of the black men and women who are in the walls of the prisons all across this country today do not belong there. I would say that the so-called crimes which have been used as excuses to bridle all of the rebellion and resistance that black people have exhibited, that we have to begin to understand the nature of crime. We have to begin to understand why black people, why it is that 40% of the 38,000 inmates in the prisons in the state are black. 40%.
In the state of California.
In the state of California. And see, I don't. And most of the brothers and sisters who are in prison have been picked up either for no reason at all, or for things like, taking something. They say stealing something. And see, just that act of going out and taking a loaf of bread, taking a stick of butter, in order to ensure the survival of black people, in order to ensure the survival of one's family. I mean, that's an act of resistance, and we have to see it that way. But what's happening is that inside the prisons, more and more black people are realizing that that individual act is not going to change, is not going to destroy the conditions which force us to go out and do that we have to get together. We have to talk about collective resistance, collective revolution against the source of our problems. And that's why what's happening is that the prisons are becoming more and more repressive. The Soledad Brothers case is very key in understanding what's happening in the prisons, where you have three brothers who are known for their attempts to engage in political organizing within the prison, within Soledad, who were singled out as criminals, who were singled out as having murdered, as having killed a white prison guard, when it's obvious that they had absolutely nothing to do with it. They're using that as an excuse to railroad those brothers to the gas chamber so that the other inmates then see what the penal system has in store for them if they carry on the struggle.
This then is a way of control and genocide too, you might say.
Yeah, and then, Bobby Seale, that's, in this country today, that's the key to an understanding of what the political prisoner is. Again, it's the same thing. Bobby was busted on a trumped-up murder charge, and they're using criminal charges as instruments of political repression, and also to keep the people out here in line. Because, see, when you see that if you go out to organize people, you go out to work, struggle for freedom, that this is what they are going to have in store for you, that you're going to be kidnapped from the streets, they can get you on a conspiracy charge, which means they have to have practically no evidence whatsoever in order to prove that. And you see, they're trying to tell us out here that this is what our fate will be if we continue to struggle. And we aren't listening to that. We say that we're going to fight until we have freed all political prisoners so that we can carry forth the struggle, so that we can destroy an imperialistic, fascist, racist system.
All right, Seigner here. Angela Davis and I. You've heard Angela Davis. And what you might call an opening speech. For Angela Davis and friends.